This took place back in the 50s, in a dry town in Texas. A young day laborer lived with his wife and their small son in a little house by the side of the road. He didn't own any land, but he had the will and the hope that someday he could escape the debts that tormented him. Every dawn he went out to work with empty pockets and a bowed head, dreaming that one day he could have what was his, even though, for now, neither the sun nor the debts gave him any rest. One morning, he walked to the town store. It wasn't pretty. It was an old shack painted with remnants of white paint. Through an open window, you could see sacks of flour, bundles of beans, sugar cubes, and cheap tobacco. It was the place where everyone went, and half the town was in debt there. He pushed the door open. The rusted hinge squeaked like an accusing finger. All eyes were fixed on him. The shopkeeper, a fat man with a red face and cold eyes, raised his voice like someone throwing a stone to break something. "Here comes the one who lives on credit." The phrase landed like a slap. Some let out dry laughs, others looked down, feigning pity. He felt the weight of every gaze burning the back of his neck. He swallowed hard. His throat was as dry as the earth. He stepped forward with slumped shoulders toward the counter. "Good morning," he murmured. "Good evening to you," the shopkeeper replied with a crooked smile. "To me, you are nothing but debt." The man pulled out his thick, grease-stained ledger. He opened it right where the laborer's name was repeated over and over. Flour, coffee, sugar, cheap tobacco, dates, numbers. No stories, just debt. "You didn't pay today, nor yesterday. Tell me when you're going to follow through." "As soon as they pay me this week," he whispered. "Promises." The man banged on the counter. The dry sound was like a whip crack. "Promises don't fill my cash register. If you don't pay today, tomorrow everyone will know you aren't just poor, but a starving beggar." Outside, his wife heard everything behind the cracked door. There was no need to see. The shouts pierced like knives. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from helplessness. It wasn't the first time, but this time it hurt more. The whole town was pushing him down. He felt a thick heat rise in his chest. He wanted to lift his face. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't. The words were stuck like stones. He took the empty basket, turned around, and walked out into the sun. The murmurs followed him like flies. "There he goes again," a woman said. "Lives on credit," added an old man, spitting into the dust. He kept walking along the dry path. Each step hurt as if he were carrying nails in his feet. The empty basket felt heavier than if it were full. He wasn't carrying food, he was carrying shame. When he arrived, his wife closed the door firmly and looked at him intensely. "I'm tired," she said without shouting. "Tired of owing. Tired of bowing my head. Tired of being pointed at like we're trash." "I work," he murmured. "Yes, you work, but it's not enough. The little that comes in goes to pay what we already owe and to buy in advance what doesn't even exist yet." He looked down. He had no defense. "Do you know what hurts more than having no money?" she said. "Having people scream at you like you're worth nothing. Having our son see that." He clenched his fists. In his mind resonated the shopkeeper's dry laughter, the crooked glares, the dirty ledger. His life seemed written on those pages. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window while the wind dragged the dust like a mockery. His wife slept, his son too. He didn't. Debt didn't just empty his pockets. It emptied his soul. He looked at his calloused hands, cracked from work, and there, in the middle of the darkness, he whispered, "I will never owe a single cent to anyone ever again." His wife heard him from the bed. She said nothing, but she recognized that voice. It wasn't the voice of a broken man. It was the voice of one who decides to stand up. At dawn, the laborer didn't drag his feet. He walked slowly but firmly. He didn't have money, but he had resolve. He grabbed an old, rusted shovel and went behind the outhouse. He began to dig a small hole. The earth was hard and parched, as if it were resisting too. He sweated, his hands filled with dirt, but he didn't stop. He dug as if with every shovel stroke he was burying the shame. He found a small, rusted tin box. He didn't have even a single coin, but he buried it anyway. It wasn't a hiding place. It was a promise. When payday arrived, the foreman, a weathered man with a shrewd gaze, said to him, "Want me to advance you 10 coins like always?" The labourer took a deep breath. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I don't want to owe any more." There were laughs. "This one's gone crazy," said one. "Let's see how long it lasts," added another. But he didn't laugh. He continued sharpening his machete calmly. The following days were harder than before. There was no coffee in the mornings, no tobacco at night. Food was scarce. The pot boiled thin, but it hurt differently. It wasn't the misery of a slave. It was that of a man who fights. And that misery, though bitter, had dignity. To stop the shopkeeper from harassing him, he did something that hurt like a blow. He pawned his only shoes. He left them on the counter, clean but old. The shopkeeper snatched them up without mercy. That night, he walked barefoot along the rough path. He felt every stone, every thorn, but he didn't turn back. His wife looked at him in silence while their son slept on her arm. "If you are sure about this," she said, "I'm with you." "I'm tired of owing," he replied. "I'd rather eat less but with my head held high." His tears fell dry without a sound. They weren't from defeat. They were from someone who knows that freedom has a price. Payday arrived. He felt the crumpled paper envelope in his hand. Out of habit, his feet wanted to take him to the store, but he squeezed the money in his pocket and turned around. He walked barefoot to his house, took out the tin box, and dropped 3 coins and a bill inside. The sound was small, but inside him it echoed like thunder. The shopkeeper saw him pass and shouted mockingly, "Hey, Mr. Credit, today you're bringing something to pay, aren't you?" The labourer stopped. His feet were covered in dust, his face burned, his hands hard. He walked to the counter. "Here it is," he said, leaving his shovel wrapped in a sack. "This is what you're going to give me?" asked the shopkeeper. "It's the only thing I have," he replied. The shopkeeper laughed dryly. Shoes, and now a shovel. What a way to pay! But that laughter didn't hurt him anymore, because this man who used to enter hunched over now walked out upright. And although he had no shoes, no shovel, and no luxuries, he had recovered the most expensive thing, his voice. Months passed, slow, silent, hard. Every 2 weeks, when he received his pay, the first thing he did wasn't to run to the store, nor to look at what was missing at home. The first thing was to set aside a portion and save it. It wasn't much, a few coins, a few folded bills, but he did it with the firmness of someone who, without saying it, had decided to break a chain. The tin box, the same one that once sat empty and rusted behind the outhouse, began to have weight. Every coin that fell inside sounded soft and dry, but in his chest, it resonated like a drum. It wasn't just money. It was dignity saved piece by piece. Temptation followed him like a shadow. He would pass the store, and the smell of hot coffee would envelop him. The tobacco, the salted meat, the shiny bottles, everything whispered to him, "Just a little. No one will notice." But he didn't yield. He knew what that pleasure cost: humiliation, debt, shame. He learned something no one had taught him. To get out of debt, you have to learn to say no. And the hardest part is saying it in front of the mirror. Every 2 weeks, he repeated the same ritual. There was no applause or witnesses, only silence, sweat, and discipline. In a small town, even silence is noticed. The neighbours looked at him with curiosity. One of them, an old labourer tired of owing, told him one day, "What's the point of saving if we're going to die poor anyway?" The labourer replied, without raising his voice, "It's so that, even if I die poor, I don't die owing." One day, the shopkeeper shouted at him again in front of everyone, but this time he didn't flinch. "Are you going to pay me or not?" roared the fat man behind the counter. The labourer reached into his shirt and pulled out the envelope he had been preparing for weeks. He placed it on the wood without hesitation. "Yes," he said, "but this will be the last time I owe you a single cent." The shopkeeper opened the envelope. The money was exact, neither more nor less. The entire store went silent. The customers watched him without mockery. No one said a word when that thin man walked through the door. It wasn't necessary. He walked with his head held high. His silence was his shout. That night, in the adobe house, his wife hugged him. It wasn't a celebratory hug, it was one of relief. "We paid it all," she said with a trembling voice. "No," he replied. "We paid yesterday. Today we start living for real." From that day on, every cent had a destination. Proper food, necessary tools, a portion saved in the earth. Nothing more. No loans, no favors, which are collected with tongues and humiliation, in a town where everyone owed something. The one who didn't owe began to shine, even if he had nothing else. Over time, people noticed his change. He no longer asked for credit. He no longer appeared on the shopkeeper's list. He no longer bowed his head. His clothes were still old and his house humble. But he walked upright. He learned one of the hardest lessons. You don't need to earn more to live better. You need to stop owing. Because debt doesn't just steal money, it steals your voice. It steals time. It steals dignity. 3 years passed without miracles, without lucky breaks, only work and silence. The tin box stopped being just a box. It became a symbol. With those coins saved one by one, he bought a piece of dry land on the edge of town. Hard land, poor land, but his. Paid for without stained papers, without someone else's name. When he signed the contract in front of the notary, he felt he breathed deeply for the first time in his life. His wife hugged him tight, and didn't she say, "We did it"? She didn't say anything, just rested her forehead on his shoulder, because there are victories that don't need words. The shopkeeper remained at his counter, just as fat, just as arrogant, but something had changed. He no longer had power over him. One dusty afternoon, he saw him pass and called out in a different tone, almost kind. "Hey, laborer, if you ever want credit to improve your little house, you know where I am." The laborer stopped and looked him in the eyes. There was no hate, only calm. "I don't need credit anymore, sir," he said. "I pay with facts, and if I don't have it, I don't buy it." The shopkeeper looked down. That man he used to humiliate now had something he couldn't sell. Dignity. The same neighbors who once laughed at his refusal of advances began to visit him. They wanted to know how he had done it, how someone with no education and no inheritance had secured land without owing anyone. "There is no secret," he would say, sitting on the wooden bench under the porch. "I just stopped living as if tomorrow were eternal." One of them murmured, "But it's hard. We always need something." The laborer looked at him intently. "Don't confuse need with habit. Need is eating. Habit is spending what you don't have." The words floated in the hot air. No one replied, but everyone understood. At every dawn, the laborer walked through his land. It wasn't fertile, it had no irrigation, no shiny fences, but it was his. He planted just enough, harvested just enough. Most importantly, he owed no one. No one called him to collect. No one could put an invisible collar around his neck. He was a poor man, yes, but with a straight spine and a heart at peace. And in that town, that was worth more than a painted house or a new hat. One afternoon, as the sun sank behind the hills, he sat with his wife on the porch. She was sewing in silence. He looked at his dry plot. "Do you remember when they shouted at us in the store?" he said. "Yes," she replied. "Never again," he said, pressing the earth with his boot. Because when a man learns not to owe, the world stops having its collar on his neck. She smiled. It was a smile without luxuries, but full of victory. The next day, a young companion arrived at his house at dawn. He had the same tired look he had had years ago, void of money, void of direction. "What do I do?" the young man asked. The laborer looked at him without false compassion, without big speeches. Start by saying no. No to the advance, no to credit, no to spending what doesn't exist yet, no to living as a slave to an open account. The young man lowered his head and didn't reply, but something in his face changed, because there are words that make no noise but germinate slowly. That night, with the wind hitting the cracks of the house, the laborer remembered everything. The humiliation, the anger, the buried box, the first coins, the last debt paid. No one gave him anything. No one saved him. He did it himself, learning not to owe anyone. And in a world where almost everyone runs after what they don't have, he found an invisible treasure, the peace of not owing. Debt doesn't start with a paper, he thought. It starts with a habit. Every time you spend what you don't have, you surrender a piece of your freedom. It's not the store, it's not the bank, it's you who ties yourself up. Freedom is not having a lot. Freedom is that no one can take anything from you because you owe nothing. Dear friend, I am so glad you reached the end of this video. Comment the phrase, "I am free." And don't forget to subscribe to the Fable Haven channel for more stories. And remember, there are more stories on your screen. Thank you so much.